Hi, I'm Old North Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. In the long, long ago world of October, I thought that I would start a series of reading and commenting on The Lord of the Rings from the perspective of someone with a similar professional background to J.R.R. Tolkien's, given that my professional background is in historical linguistics, specifically, especially the Germanic languages. In my case, leaning more Old Norse, in his case, leaning more Old English, but those are pretty close medieval languages. And, having kind of a similar nerdy drive, I think uh, drove us both into the careers that we took. I did read Lord of the Rings as a kid, and I also read Tolkien's biography, and I actually remember his biography a lot better than I remembered any of the fantasy. So I posted the first video in, I think, October or November, reading the first few chapters of The Fellowship of the Ring. And the first one got huge views. Um, One of the biggest views of 2024 for me, which isn't saying much because 2025 has already been a better year than the entirety of 2024, but it was big. And then it fell off real sharp. I think people were expecting me to maybe read the entire book, which, to be fair, probably if I had done that, the same drop in views would have happened. Uh, all the videos of me reading something have always done poorly. I think people think it sounds cool and then don't actually want it. But at any rate, the series has been, it's had its fans, few people who really wanted to follow along with this whole thing. It's had its detractors. I've been really surprised at the vehemence of the detractors sometimes. I'm sorry I said your book that you think is perfect isn't perfect, as if that's even what I've been dwelling on, right? Like, I don't dislike this book. I think it's charming. And, I enjoyed the time that I spent reading it. Mostly, I don't remember ever disliking reading any part of it. And sometimes really, really liked it. I could see myself reading it again. Maybe not real soon, but I can see myself reading it again. Um, and then I did a video after reading all of the narrative chapters about the movies that, oddly enough, got even more interesting in the vehemence of detractors. And then I was a little burned out of it. So I thought I might stop, but then I thought, well, no, I should do the appendices at least because there's actually a fair amount that I can probably say there. Um, I have bought the Silmarillion a few months ago, so I haven't unwrapped it. Thought this was, kind of a pretty edition of it. I might or might not do this on YouTube. Uh, again, the interest has been pretty small in the Lord of the Rings series. Maybe I'll do it as a Patreon thing. You know, I know the idea. If you're a $3 a month Patreon donor, you get to hear the Silmarillion updates. And if you're a $5 or higher one, then you don't. So it'll incentivize people to bump their support up. All right. Let's actually look at this. Um, the appendices get fairly deep into all the language stuff and names and things like that. So I might have a thing or two to say. Although most of these comments I took months ago when I was going through it. Well, my first comment on the appendices, in the margin to the side where he says at the beginning of Appendix A, concerning the sources for most of the matter contained in the following appendices, especially A to D, see the note at the end of the prologue. The section A3, Durin's folk, was probably derived from Gimli the dwarf, who maintained his friendship with Peregrine and Meriadoc and met them again many times in Gondor and Rohan. To the side of that in the margin, I wrote brilliant or insane, which, again, keep in mind my critical remarks, such as they are really sort of affectionate, right? It's like I get this kind of nerdiness, this kind of obsession. I'm never gonna do this, right? I mean, there's no way I could make money off of a fantasy novel. I don't have anything new, but like I appreciate that somebody who had no idea that he was going to make money off of it wound up getting something this crazy uh, published. And again, crazy, I say affectionately. Okay. Um, all right. So we get a mention of Arundel, the mariner, and of course, Arundel, that's based on the name in Old English of uh, Venus, the planet. This is pretty interesting because the name uh, or a cognate name occurs in Old Norse as Aurvandil. And in Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda, he says that um, Thor was carrying uh, Aurvandil across a river in a basket. And one of Aurvandil's toes stuck out of the basket and got frostbite. And Thor broke off the toe and threw it into the sky. And so there is now a star called Urvandil's Tau, Urvandil's toe. And so it's who knows if that story or something like it was current in Old English, but it's fun to see that name here, and of course it's connected with this bit that we read about in the appendix, and I think in the Silmarillion quote. His ship bearing the Silmaril was set to sail in the heavens as a star, off quote. So, right. It's not the same story. There's no frostbitten toe, but it's fun to see the star from Old English and Old Norse appear there as a star. Um, all right. There's a lot of stuff about the early history of Numenor and Andor and Gondor and the names of their rulers and the different names of gods or Valar, right? Auron, Orome. Um, there's a pretty, I mean, all this stuff about the history of the North Kingdom and the Dunedain and all this associated stuff with Numenor and Gondor and Andor. I am astonished that anybody can follow this stuff without reading it 5 or 6 times. I mean, there's so many names. There's these complicated interactions of who's related to who and to what degree and whose title is higher than that person's title. And I realize absolutely that this is a hypocritical thing to complain about because I read Icelandic sagas that are the exact same way. Um, but again, it's just as I think I said in the last video about the narrative chapters about the Lord of the Rings. It astonishes me and sort of delights me that you know this book is such a commercial success, probably more after his lifetime than during his lifetime, unfortunately. But he had no idea that it was going to be right. Like it is so plain to see that this was a book written to please himself. And in a lot of ways, that makes its faults, such as they are, all the more forgivable. Because I mean, if imagine the guy that I don't know, your neighbor, the next apartment over that you run into at the mailboxes or whatever, um, you find out that he's written a fantasy novel and you think, oh, okay, that sounds kind of generic. And then you see something, this thick with all these appendices. It's like, all right, I respect the structure, the vision that you bring to this, regardless of my interest in it. It's pretty impressive. um, all right. Um, I thought that it was kind of interesting. Pages 1046, 1047 of this edition of Lord of the Rings, in Appendix A, we get Gondor and the Northmen, so early relatives of of the Rohirrim, who have interesting names that look kind of like Romanized Gothic to me. And I'm sure something like that is his intention, right? Um, we get a name, Widugavia, which looks like, wood gift, maybe. Widu Mabi, which looks like wood gull. I don't know. Winitharia, which looks like friend dare, something like that. I'm sure that that's intentional, given that these are supposed to be kind of an earlier related people to the Rohirrim speaking Old English, that their language would be represented as Gothic makes a lot of sense. And it's kind of fun. Um, and then there was an interesting quote on page 1051 from the end of Angmar. Uh, quote, Earnur now rode back, but Glorfindel, looking into the gathering dark, said, Do not pursue him. He will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall. These words many remembered, off quote. Um, this is such a characteristic of medieval literature that people who are wise in any capacity, right? Whether that, and the word wise means, every kind of mental power in medieval literature, certainly Old Norse literature, whether they're wise in our sense, or they're clever, or they're learned, they have the ability to see the future and accurately predict it, um, which I made a video a long time ago called something like Prophecy Among the Norse and Us, where I pointed out that many of our cinematic and literary heroes also, for no real reason other than to suggest that they're smart, can see the future. And I still think that that's kind of a funny thing that we just automatically assume that smart people can do. So and so called this, as if anyone is really doing more than throwing darts at the board. Um, Page 1052, I didn't fully understand why, and now by confessing this, I'm going to get a whole bunch of comments about it. Why, the after the last uh, king of Gondor passes away, why somebody else in Gondor can't just take the title of king. I didn't really get why the stewards needed to just be stewards. Um, but fine, I get it. It's a cool, it's a literarily neat, right? The steward. And I like the humility of the office of steward um, versus king. But I don't understand, as a matter of just human ambition over the generations, why somebody didn't just finally say, I'm king. you know, it seems like that probably would have been Boromir if he had risen to the throne, but of course he didn't. Retroactive spoiler alert. Um, Once again, we see a description of Denethor as resembling Aragorn, something that I think it would have been interesting if the movie had done, but you know, God forbid that I talk about the movies and say they aren't the. Uh, isn't it okay to say that the books are better than the movies because they are? Um, and yet that apparently is something I shouldn't have dared to say. Um, all right, now we get into Appendix A, section Roman numeral 2, and talking about the royal house of Errol, right? So the lords of the Rohirrim, and there we get into a lot of Old English names. So Errol the Young, Lord of the Men of Eothed. All right, so Errol, Old Norse Jarl, modern English Earl, right? This is a title of nobility. Eotheod, it's literally like horse nation. That Theod element is Old Norse Thjóð, Old English Theod, Old Norse Thjóð. Um, and in Iceland today, still Sweden is called Svíþjóð, Swede nation. So that's a cool element to see him using. We see a lot of these families of people speaking Old English or similar languages in Middle Earth are designated by ing. So we get the Baronings and the Erlings. That's realistic. Um, we also see something like that in Old Norse, although usually it's ung, the Volsungar, Saga of the Volsungs, translated by me. Go check that out if you haven't. Leod is the father of Eorl. Leod, a root for people, but in Old English, you do see that root used to make a word for king. Um, Interestingly, the one place in Old Norse where you might see that root used to make a word for king is in Völuspá, the Poetic Edda, a poem that has a lot of Old English vocabulary, where Volundr is called Alvaljóði, um, possibly king of elves, or possibly just person of the people of the elves, but still just the use of that word. Uh, it's pretty Old English looking. That poem has a ton of Old English in it. You should come to my Norse Myth classes on Zoom. We talk about all this stuff. We get into so much detail about these poems. The most casual shrugging of advertisements that I make throughout this. And you know what? You should check out my friends and partners at Grimfrost. I won't be casual and shrugging about them. They're super cool and they've supported me for a long time. And talking to them about coming um, in late June to a midsummer festival that they're going to have in Sweden, and maybe doing some other stuff in Sweden. So check that out. I'll be posting updates about that. But even if you don't, you can get stuff like Nevatable board game from them. You can get cool replica Viking weapons and t-shirts, sometimes with cool runic phrases that I've translated for them. They're great guys. It's Grimfrost, GRIMFROST.com. Um, I don't want to go back and annotate a video that three people will watch, but I trust that you hear what I'm spelling. And I'm doing this just a day before the next round of Zoom classes starts. I'll put a pinned comment with links to that. But there's Essential Old Norse where I teach you to read Old Norse if you maybe have no experience with learning languages before. There's an Old Norse reading club where we're going to read all of Gisli Saga. There's a detailed breakdown of Völuspá and Hávamál that we're going to do, going through the entire text slowly, word by word. You can do that even if you don't know Old Norse. And then you can join the myth class kind of in the middle. The next poem we're going to start working on Lokasana for the Poetic Edda with them tomorrow. All right, more Old English names in Appendix A. Frumgar looks like first spear, either first in order or first in the front, the van, as they would have said in the old days, or J.R. Tolkien would have said, the vanguard. Fram, bold, probably, or I mean, from an Old Norse perspective, it kind of looks like just forward. I think that there's kind of an interesting scene here where so Errol's father Leod was killed by a horse, and we get this quote on 1065, quote, Errol vowed that he would avenge his father. He hunted long for the horse, and at last he caught sight of him, and his companions expected that he would try to come within bowshot and kill him. But when they drew near, Errol stood up and called in a loud voice, Come hither, man's bane, and get a new name. To their wonder, the horse looked towards Errol and came and stood before him, and Errol said, Fellarove, I name you. You loved your freedom, and I do not blame you for that, but now you owe me a great weir guild, and you shall surrender your freedom to me until your life's end, off quote. It's a lot of culture in this. Um, the power of a name. Um, I don't know that the horse had a name previously, though he addresses the horse as Mansbane, written as one word by Tolkien, I assume, because it's how it is in this edition. So I guess that he's asserting that that's its name. We see so often in medieval literature people shifting between names, but those names that they're assuming being treated as true names while they're assumed. And of course, so an example of that would be in the Saga of Herborn Haetheric, translated by me and two sagas of mythical heroes, where Hervor, a woman, for a long time is disguised as Hervarder, a man, and she is not referred to as she when she's going by Hervarder. She's always referred to as he, and the name is always Hervarder. And the same thing with, Odin will take another name, uh, Bolverkor, evildoer, in the story of retrieving the mead from Sotungor and Gunlov. Um, and he's just referred to that name the whole way through. And then people can give someone else a name. And so, like in uh, one of the Helgi poems, I think Helgi kviði Hjörvarssonar in the Poetic Edda, Helgi doesn't have a name. Maybe it's Helgi kviði Hundiksvana one. I mix this up sometimes in my head. Um, he doesn't have a name because no name like sticks to him. But then Valkyrie gives him a name, and he wants a gift to go along with that name. So typically, names are given with gifts. We don't see that in this particular story, but I feel like we saw that somewhere else in The Lord of the Rings. And the name that he gives the horse is Fellarov, so like much fast, basically makes sense. And of course, the concept of Weirgild. I'm sure anyone watching this video knows what that is, but it's unsurprising, obviously, to see a word like that here. Fellarov would allow no man but Errol to mount him, off quote, exactly like Sigurdur, the hero of the Saga of the Volsungs and his horse Grani. Um, the horse proves as long lived as men, off quote. That also kind of sounds like Grani. Uh, Grani seems to be there for a whole lot of Sigurdur's story from youth to whenever exactly he dies. It's hard to say exactly how what the time span is supposed to be between, Sigurdur killing Fafnir and Sigurdur's death. Anyway, um, trying to interpret some of my remarks here. Okay, I don't understand something I wrote, but an interesting note. Maybe this will be interesting to somebody is I guess men are like elves to horses because we live longer than they do. Okay. All right. Um, things that make sense only if you are, and really absorbed in reading these appendices are probably really high. There's a Freka, so looks like the name of one of Odin's wolves, Freki. Um, Probably something like devourer. That may not be what it means in Old English context. I'm always going to kind of read Old English through an Old Norse lens. Freya Winna, Lord, um, Lord Friend. There is a wolf. Obviously, it means wolf. Um, Haleth Helmson. I believe Haleth would just be man. There's a word in Old Norse poetry that kind of looks like that, but just mean man. Holdar. Hama. So like homie, basically. Um, Actually, you see that word for home in a fair number of names in Old Norse, Heimdallr, and Hamdir with a uh, guess that's the same root, shortened from the diphthong, probably in the Proto Norse period. Um, Freyalav, so survivor of his lord, Hild, Helm's sister, actually really historical because names in Hildur and Icelandic are feminine. So, Bryn Hildur, for example, the Valkyrie in Saga of the Volsungs. King Folkwenna, people friend, army friend in a more Old Norse context, but probably just people friend. Makes sense for a king. And then we get the line of the kings of the mark starting at page 1068. Here we have a ton of names, a bunch of which I've gone through. But there's Errol, there's Brego, just like Prince, Aldor. Kind of strikes me as just Prince or Man, Freya, Lord, Freya Winna, Goldwinna, Gold Friend, Deor, Dear One. Of course, also the title of a poem in Old English about a Deor, by a Deor. Gram, so fierce ruler. Um, Britta, I don't know. Almost looks like that Old English bird word, but from an Old Norse perspective, it looks like the break root. Not sure exactly what that's supposed to be. Walda, ruler, Folka, ruler, Fengel, ruler, Thengel, ruler. By the way, Hringa Thengel is a kinning, kind of a loose kinning used for Beowulf himself in Beowulf, and it means the Lord of the Rings, Thengel, Lord, Hringa of the Rings. It's kind of cool, right? Twin sons, Folkred, Fosterred, folk ruler, strong ruler. Theodwyn, so um, like people joy. Win, W-Y-N is joy, W-I-N-E is friend. Win versus win. Theoden uh, just means ruler, king. In Gothic, uh, Theodans is used all the time. It's just a normal word for king, and Theodan in archaic Old Norse you see pretty often. Um, Theoden Ednu, so a new or wouldn't be oath new because it'd be oth in Old English. I guess I'm thinking in Swedish sometimes here. Also, I guess he's 71, Theoden, during the events of the Two Towers and the Return of the King. It's kind of doesn't seem that old in the movie, right? And the movie conditions so much of how we think about these things. His son is Theodred, so people ruler Elfhild. This is Queen Elf battle. Uh, Eomer Eadi. So Eadi is the nickname of Eomer. So Eomer, like, which is actually a name of Tista and Beowulf, uh, horse man, right? I don't know. I can't put a precise finger on what the mare element is in his name. I don't think it's mare. It could be horse, right? I mean that word for mare in English actually survives from a root that could be used of masculine and feminine. So I guess it could be horse. There are other precedents for that, Gunhildr or Hildigunr in Old Norse, like battle. But his nickname is Eadi, so he's Eomer, the like the wealthy or lucky. I think wealthy is the basic meaning in Old English. And his friend is Elfwine. That makes perfect sense. Elf friend. Um, oh, and I was right. Something I guessed about in the narrative of Lord of the Rings, so I wasn't looking at the appendices while I was reading the narrative, that Holdwyn, a faithful friend, is Tolkien doesn't spell out what any of these names mean. I'm telling you what the names mean when I can deduce it quickly. Holdwyn, that's the nickname that Aomer gave to Meriadoc, so I was right about that. That's fun. Then we get into the names of the dwarves. Now, tomorrow, starting that class, we're going to read through Willisbow and Havamal in great detail. And, we go through this long list of names of dwarves. And it actually looks like that list is quite archaic. My recent research project on and ov, the so-called filler words in Old Norse, shows, uh, as is often claimed, that I hadn't seen substantial enough documentation of, that these words occur where prefixes uh, were in other Old Germanic languages like Gothic and Old English. And the Catalog of the Dwarves is a lot of that stuff. Durin is one of the first mentioned um, in that list of the famed dwarves of long ago. His name apparently has something to do with doors. I actually think it's probably what it is. It's the most reasonable assumption, although I'll talk about a few others in that class. There's Nauen, who's that could be something to do with Naur corpse, or it could be the near root. There's Thrauen. Um, Thraur is like obstinacy. Thrauen is a name that we see in Njal Saga and some other Icelandic sagas. We see something about a great jewel called the Arkenstone. Uh, that word Erkenstan is used in Old English of a treasure, actually borrowed into Old Norse as Jaknastein, which we see in Volandurkvida and a couple other places probably borrowed from Volandurkvida ultimately. Thorin could have something to do with Thora to dare, probably not the god Thor, which is a long O. This is a short O. Dowan, which looks like it literally means dead. Fror, uh, something to do with um, maybe seeds, although there's also a Freren mentioned, which looks like frozen. Gror, something to do with grow. Bror, I don't know. Boren, born, carried. Oakenshield mentioned as a separate dwarf in the list in Vilispal, but it's Aikenskjaldi. Dis, that's a feminine name, does not occur in that list of dwarf names, which are all masculine. Um, JRR is making that up as a dwarf name here. Naur looks for all the world like corpse. Funden, found. Uh, Balin, glowing. Balin, if it has a long A, it could be fiery. Glowing would be glowed, or even something to do with an ember. Something about the dwarf ring, which I didn't fully follow on page 1076, but I took a note in the margins. This comes up in the Council of Elrond. You'd have to read this book 10 times in a row to catch it without the footnote. That seems true. By footnote, I probably meant reference in the appendix. Oh, and then finally in page 1080, we get a description of dwarves, which I wanted in the narrative. I could never figure out what we were supposed to picture. Um, quote, it was said by Gimli that there are few dwarf women, probably no more than a third of the whole people. They seldom walk abroad except at great need. They are in voice and appearance, and in garb if they must go on a journey, so like to the dwarf men that the eyes and ears of other people cannot tell them apart. Um, Off quote. Okay, so I guess it's a description of dwarf women, and dwarves are referred to as beardlings somewhere in this appendix, so I assume the women have beards anyway. Yet Gimli wants Galadriel. So, this sort of seems like, if you're a dwarf and that's what dwarf women are like, isn't that what you want? I don't know. It seems to me a little bit like the old sci-fi movies where Martians who look like bugs want human women. Why? Um, we get this chronology of Middle Earth with Gandalf sailing to Middle Earth, which sounds kind of cool. I think some of that Rings of Power series builds on the appendices back here. Um, I don't know if they ever deal with that, but like a lot of what he suggests, these sort of earlier stories, like these prequels in here sound cool. It'd be cool to see, Gandalf's early adventures in Middle Earth, right? It'd be cool to see what J.R. Tolkien thinks, not what Amazon exec think. Um, oh, I noted in the chronology that Denethor is 1 year older than Aragorn, also something you don't really get a feel for from the movie. We see that Aragorn wears the ring of Barahir, which Christopher Lee memorably notes in the movie. Christopher Lee really is one of the actors that did a fantastic job in the movies, right? I mean, to say something positive about the movies. I thought it was weird that Gandalf visited Minas Tirith to read the Scroll of Isildur only right before he goes to Hobbiton. I mean, it's funny that it took him that long to go look this up. Um, did he have to get it through ILL, right? Did it take forever? Uh, I don't know. And then we have the years called the Great Years, during which the events of the Lord of the Rings actually happen. It occurred to me that a designation like the Great Years, we all want to be there until we're there. Hadn't quite occurred to me until I looked at the chronology that they were trying to cross the mountains in January, so that makes it sound a little bit more formidable than I otherwise would think of just crossing a mountain range, right? Something I do daily sometimes. Of course, in cars, but still, it's not usually that much weather. Um, I thought it was interesting that the chronology notes that Gandalf passed away after casting down the Balrog, and that his body lay on the peak. So, and then that Gandalf returned to life. So Gandalf literally was resurrected. still someone will comment about what a moron I am, but I still don't understand the theology of this. Um, we read about assaults on Lorien. I'm sure the Rings of Power get into some of this stuff, or who knows, video games or whatever, the expanded universe. But Tolkien had the power to, mention things and let you wonder about what the details were, and didn't feel like he had to fill in the details. Again, part of what makes this seem more like real myth. I wondered why Galadriel went over the sea before Celeborn. Um, it turns out that Saruman dominated the Shire for, I guess, a few months. Um, I could see people who would think that that was unbelievably short for the Shire to change that much, but I don't know. My life has changed in the matter of a few months, and you can really get used to a very new, changed life within a few months. So um, I don't know. I think he could probably come to dominate the Shire as much as he did in just a couple months. Um, I had wondered in one of the narrative videos if Samwise was called Master Samwise because he was unmarried. But in the chronology, I note that after he gets married, he's still called Master Samwise. So, hmm. There's someone named Fostred of Greenholm. So Fostred, the Old English fast counsel, strong counsel, right? Firm counsel. Elfstan is the son of Fostred and Eleanor. Elfstan is Elfstone. So probably a shout out to Aragorn. The month names that he gives for the Shire calendar look a lot like Old English month names. Uh, those elements, live, English leave, filth, moth, just a worn down form of month, um, make a lot of sense. Although Yule itself being separate from the months, that seems like that might be realistic. And at least the most description that we get of Yule and Hakuna Saka Gotha and Hamskring of Snorri, um, Yule is a few nights, and it might be between what they consider months. I can see that. Kind of realistic when he presents Quenya and Sindarin words next to each other that you can't always directly derive the Sindarin from the Quenya easily, right? Like you don't see like, oh, there's two sound changes that I can apply. He's thought out a really elaborate relationship between the languages, which again, more realistic. Um, the all the details about the months and the different calendars such. I don't know, this is an obsession I did not know he had, and an obsession that I do not share. Um, some of the Bree month names differ from the ones in the Shire. This Frary, which is like cold, frozen. Um, Sometimes in Old Norse, maybe in Old English too, you get the freeze root is Freyr with two R's. Wedmoth, it's like just wet month. Uh, and then you get the archaic looking weekdays. Uh, Staring Day, Sunin Day, Monin Day, so Star Day, Sunday, Monday. Um, but interesting that he does not use God names elsewhere. The days of the week, like our Tuesday, Odin's Day, Thor's Day, Frigg's Day, ultimately based on Latin Mars's Day, Mercury's days, Mercury's Day, Jove's Day, Venus's Day. I thought it was interesting that there was a manuscript called Yellow Skin that looks a lot like um, actual names of manuscripts in Old Norse, at least, right? We get Fagerskinna, fair skin, because this manuscript is burned, but it was apparently, pretty. Um, Graugaus, Grey Goose, who knows why it's called that. Morkenskin or Rodenskin, because that one apparently wasn't in good shape. I note that he has this whole weird reckoning about the days of the week not quite lining up with ours, and this footnote on page 1111. Quote, I have therefore in Bilbo's song on pages 158 to 60 used Saturday and Sunday instead of Thursday and Friday, off quote. So much idiosyncrasy and madness in this footnote, right? First of all, there's a song that's 2 pages long. Um, but also, which days of the week are subbing for which days of the week. Wow. Oh, Elrond is also called Master Elrond, and he's married, or he has been married, right? Um, Appendix E on writing and spelling. Yeah, it was neat. It's neat to see his vision for the languages. I don't know that I have a lot to talk about with it though. Um, he does point out that in is it which writing? Is it Tangwar? That the A is usually written with three dots above it, which they weirdly adapted in the movies for putting above the A's on the maps. Um, I was astonished at the fact that the Tangwar were set up as a set of letters that you can apply however you want, right? But different languages apply the different letters in different ways, which just, again, idiosyncrasy. Uh, I don't know of an alphabet that's used that way uh, in the real world. Some of the organization of it owes something to Devanagari, the writing system used for Hindi and that most people who don't grow up speaking another Indic language that uses a different writing system used for Sanskrit. But man, the idea that one letter can mean one thing in one language and another thing completely different in another language kind of madness. Um, the letter Are that was originally Aze because there's rhoticism, right? Just like in Old Norse where Z's become R's. Interesting little places where you can pick out places that he's being influenced by real languages. Hobbit coming from Hobbit, plausible, but I think unattested Old English word for hole builder. That's cool. On page 1131, we learned that Sauron is a conlanger because, quote, it is said that black speech was designed by Sauron and the Dark Years, off quote. So Sauron shares the conlanging hobby with, if you can call it a hobby for J.R.R. Tolkien, with J.R.R. and with Andrew and Brenna Bird, great friends of me and of the channel. Um, then we got all this stuff about the principles of translation that he follows. Um, he notes that among the hobbits, A was a masculine ending and O and E were feminine. I suspect that, so what he's saying is in Old English, that's more or less true, right? A is weak masculine nouns, instant masculine nouns. Um, so the wise one, masculine, is Froda in Old English. Now, he thinks that the people reading his book are like him and they're classically trained above all else, right? They know Latin, they know French, for example. And so they'll associate with feminine. I don't know that English speakers today necessarily have that much of a default setting for that. But he thinks that the equivalent in stem ending from Latin, O, sounds more masculine to us, to his hypothetical audience. So he's substituting that Froda with Frodo. In Old Norse, it's an I, it's Froði, a name that we actually see, for example, in Gróttusonger, a poem usually included in the Poetic Edda, included in my Poetic Edda, coming out in the second edition, probably in here in maybe September. That might be too soon, but sounds like we're doing good in our scheduling. He says that Samwise and Hamfast are modernizations of Samwise and Hamfast. So halfwise, Samwise, Samwise, and home fast, staying home, firm to home, sticking to home, home fast. We get Daegel, which looks like secret. Um, he makes up some stuff about the actual names of the hobbits, which, oh my god, again, like uh, the obsession. Maybe we get an elf description on page 1137. although I think it may just be some of them. Quote, they were tall, fair of skin, and gray-eyed, though their locks were dark, save in the golden house of Finarfin. Okay. And then a footnote, quote, these words describing characters of face and hair, in fact, only applied to the Noldor, off quote. Okay. All right. It's a lot to keep up with. Um, I also wrote in the margins loco for just this note about Gamgee, what he's representing actually in Hobbitish with this, why he wants to imply a connection between this word and that, and wild. And then we get to the index, and then we get to the map. The map is cool. I was inspired a little bit by J.R.R. Tolkien's map, I guess redrawn by Christopher Tolkien, and then by a map drawing class that Lauren got me for Christmas through Uncommon Goods. Who taught this? I'm gonna drop this guy's name because it was pretty cool. Um, Brendan Lorber. You can tell this is an unpaid uh, advertisement as such because I didn't remember his name off the top of my head. But it was cool, just tips on how to make a map, and we did like a map of our story. Um, and I came up with the idea of making a map for the second edition of the Poetic Edda that combines a map of real Scandinavia, Iceland, with their mythic conception. Because I think the ones that float around, make Yggdrasil so huge and so prominent in a way that it really isn't in the Eddas, and make things look like planets instead of one parts of one planet just don't work for me. So I wanted to draw my own, and I did. So you can look forward to that in the second edition of the Poetic Edda. I'm not spoiling that one. Well, thanks for coming along on the Lord of the Rings journey. Like I said, I know a few people enjoyed it. Some of you have been uh, very kind about it. Appreciate you. And if you have any ideas about, should I offer it on Patreon as a reward? Should I offer it on Patreon as a punishment? Or an incentive to uh, price yourself, you know, above the tiers where you have to listen to me reading the Silmarillion, as if anybody has to watch or listen to everything that gets posted. Let me know about that. And well, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.